Welcome to the Founder Experience, where we're charting the unpredictable waters of startup ventures. I'm Nathan Williams.
And I'm Alex Gutjahr.
About 15 years ago, I was really at the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey. Now, I had started businesses before. I'd tried a couple of things on the side. They didn't really work out. And I realized I didn't know enough. And I wanted to figure out how to think like an entrepreneur, like who to listen to, who could be successful, because I felt like I knew I was missing something, but I didn't know what I was missing. Ultimately, this is sort of the feeling that led me back to school, and I did my MBA. I did my master's degree, and I think that was very helpful. But at the time, I was looking to anyone who could help me think a little bit differently, because I knew that there was something that I just wasn't getting. Mm-hmm. So I went to a Donald Trump session for Trump University.
I didn't see that coming, Nathan. I have to be honest here. I didn't see that coming. Okay, it's that kind of conversation. Let's go.
It's true. Mm-hmm. I mean, at the time, I was actually asking all of my friends, what should I do? Where should I go? And one person gave me a copy of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I looked at it for 2 seconds and I realized I hated it because it felt like a scam. Uh-huh. And then I went to I got an info session for this Trump University info session. And I decided, you know what, this is probably another scam, but why not? Let's just go and see what they have to say. The whole thing, I don't know if you've ever been to an evangelical church service.
Not yet.
But it felt very similar, but even more creepy.
Okay.
You walk in, and the first thing they did is there were people setting up chairs, and they held them very close together so that you couldn't easily leave. They had an introductory video from the man himself saying how great he was, and then you had the preacher. There was a guy that went up and just started talking in a very animated voice about just how smart and how great his boss was.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah. But just for hours and hours, like for maybe about an hour, about all of the great deals that the fellow made. And then at the end, they were trying to sell you something. They were trying to sell you the next course. They were trying to sell you the next book. They were trying to sell you a piece of software to analyze stock trades for $1,000. And I was so creeped out by it. And I was like, I know that this is not right. This is someone trying to take advantage of me. But that's really one of the things at the early stages where I got very skeptical, and I was like, how can I separate knowledge that is correct from knowledge that is incorrect? Because you've got a lot of hype in the entrepreneurial space about things you have to do. You've got people telling you you've got to grind, you've got to work, 80-hour weeks. You got people telling you that that you have to have a certain mindset, or that you have to buy their book, and it really it's surprising how much it feels like a cult to me.
Yes,
and I become very skeptical of anyone who has a formula or an easy answer, because I find everything at the end of the day is nuanced. So I guess the question I have today is, how do you know who to listen to on your entrepreneurial journey? How do you tell what's right and what's wrong?
I wish I had an easy answer, but it depends. So I got so many questions. You started with Donald Trump, and I still have to get this sorted in my head, and I want to come back to that. But on your question, okay. I've been.
I actually read the most of the Art of the Deal after that, because they gave away a free copy, if you can believe it. I didn't pay for it.
But was it okay? Just before we move on, is there anything that you took from the event, or any lessons, anything that still available today, or did you still use today, or was it entirely just a waste of time and money?
It was all like basically he was pitching how to use confidence and like he wanted to say find great deals, but the whole thing was about finding underpriced assets. So he was talking about go and find someone that's getting a divorce and they want to sell their property today, and then you can
Oh,
divide it up and like,
of
but it
course.
wasn't even how to. It was just this is what he did, he bought this amazing property, but it was
I
full
see.
of antiques. And then he sold the antiques for this much money. And
He got
like, it's
lucky
like
there.
nothing that you could repeat. And it was all about how he scammed people.
Yeah,
So,
I see. So no surprise.
yeah.
Um, yeah, but I've been in similar situations where I try to find answers, especially in business, right? When I started my first agency, I I could cover the technology part whenever we were building products because I knew how to do this, but I didn't know enough about sales and marketing. This was always one of the aspects that I wasn't really good at. So I tried to find people to help me there, and it's a good question. How do you figure out who to trust? And for me, it often came down to people I already trust, using them as proxies, right? If I were to ask you, Nathan, I look for someone who can help me with sales. Do you know someone, right? Because I trust you, and if you have a good recommendation, I would go with that. Um, and this is usually what I try to do. That of course doesn't work always because you have to start somewhere. Maybe there's not a direct connection or recommendation that you could use, so you have to find someone. And I've tried working with different people, um, but it's also what you said. How do you separate like the real knowledge or the facts from what's going on there? How do you make sure you're not getting sold snake oil by someone who just wants to say something? And at this point, if you like you did this 15 years ago, it was different then, right? I'd say it's much worse these days because people can just, especially using AI, etc., and all the tools that are available, can make themselves appear much smarter or more knowledgeable than they actually are, just to sell you something. And I'm afraid most people on the internet today try to sell you something, right? They, as you said,
Mm.
it's actually one of the red flags that you should look for. If someone comes up with an easy framework, like 3 easy steps to do X or Y or whatever, that should always be a red flag because these are general purpose solutions, and I wouldn't I wouldn't go with them necessarily. And another thing that I find interesting, I'm not sure if it was in the context of Rich Dad Poor Dad, which you mentioned, but if someone is offering a course or any sort of product, usually if there's a mismatch between what they sell you and what they say they are doing, right? So they will say, I'm in the business of doing, I'm not sure, buying real estate, whatever. But then you see, okay, like Alex Hormozy is I'm not sure if he's a good example, but he's really good at selling books, right? He just recently launched his new book and broke a world record in selling that book, right? So I'm not, um, I, I guess what I want to say is that often people um, say that they're doing a certain thing, but then what they're actually doing is just selling to you, like selling something like a product to you, and then you sometimes will see that there's some sort of mismatch. I'm not sure if I got the point across, but
No, that
it's
makes
one of the
sense. I
things.
mean, I think one of the things that you can do to protect yourself is expectation management, right?
Hmm.
What I find is that at least when I started my journey, and I see this a lot in young entrepreneurs, is that they're looking for a mentor. And they're looking for someone to help them become the entrepreneur, an entrepreneur. They're looking for someone to help them become an entrepreneurial success.
Hmm.
And almost like an Obi-Wan Kenobi to guide your Luke Skywalker, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, Obi-Wan Kenobi isn't for hire. There is no Obi-Wan Kenobi out there. There's no one who can take you by the hand and teach you everything you need to know. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, you have to be able to take lessons from different mentors. And I think that this is really where we're at, maybe as a society now. Like maybe in the old days, you could find someone to train you up in an almost apprenticeship like situation. But today, I think that entrepreneurial endeavors really are quite specialized, unless, like, if you're going to be a success, right? You got to find a niche. And the problem is, if you found a good niche, there isn't going to be another entrepreneur that understands that niche. You can be trained up maybe in an apprenticeship in something like, blacksmithing, and then you can start a blacksmithing school. Sure, that's different. That's a trade. That's something that's established. It's something where there's precedent. You can run a restaurant and learn all the ins and outs of running a restaurant and then start your own restaurant. That's fine. But to become sort of an entrepreneurial apprentice, where someone takes you on the road of becoming an entrepreneur, there's so many things to know that are specialized to your field. How can that be stylized into a course? And also, usually someone that's in that position doesn't have time for it. I find even some of my best friends who are experienced entrepreneurs, much more, knowledgeable and successful than I am, I ask them questions about things like pricing. I ask them things about, how to do things regarding different VCs, and maybe I get a 20% hit rate where
Hmm.
they give good advice, and 80% of the time it's generic advice because they don't understand the situation, and that's kind of normal, and I don't feel bad about that. That's actually not a terrible rate for someone that's been in that situation. Um, and I think that we just have to understand that there are a lot of things as you go through an entrepreneurial journey that you need to figure out yourself, and the best way to get these lessons is to take as many different pieces of advice as possible and then filter them yourself for what fits your situation.
Yeah, I also think it's a good idea if you run experiments, right? If you get advice and you have some way of testing out hypothesis or any advice that you get and see if it actually makes a difference, right? Where in sales that can be just trying cold outreach as we discussed before, like these kind of things, and seeing if they work for a particular situation. And I've mostly worked with or in an agency, and I think there can be blueprints for this kind of business because it's you're selling a service. But if you have a product that's very unique and you're operating in a niche, then you're right. Then how do you get that knowledge? Because people who've been there are probably busy and don't want to share their secrets, most likely. So you have to explore, mostly explore, run experiments, and then see what works. And I've done the same thing. I've worked with different mentors for different skills that I think I was missing, and some had better advice, or what they suggested worked better than others that I worked with, right? So I think at the end of the day, you really have to filter and try.
I also think there's a lot that you can filter out just by who's saying the words, right? So you mentioned you take advice from your friends or from people you trust. You bring them a problem, and then you already trust them, right? And there are some tests that you can do to see who you trust. For me, a lot of it has to do with someone's motivation and what they've been through.
Mhm.
So, someone who is peddling an easy answer, or who is trying to cultivate a vibe and say, okay, I'm successful or I'm an entrepreneur or whatever, I immediately don't trust that. I immediately don't trust that. I look for people who have been through the grind, who had failures that they've learned from, and who have ideally not come from a background where they had too much privilege. Let's be real here. No one succeeds in entrepreneurship without having some level of privilege, because it is very, very difficult to start a business without family support networks, without
Yeah.
friends and network, without access to capital. And it can happen, but it is very difficult to get there without having some sort of help network. That said, if someone is born into a family where they have infinite money, effectively, then how much could they possibly learn from the grind, right?
Did they
And I'm very suspicious of that. I am.
Yeah, that's I agree. I also look for people who've been in my shoes. Right? Again, for me that mostly meant agency business, but I worked with a mentor who still has an agency to this date. He's from the UK. And whenever we spoke, I saw that he could relate to the situations or the problems that I was facing. Right. That's I would say is another good measure. If you're bringing your problems, to what extent do they understand the context and the struggles or the things that you need to balance for that particular situation, right? Is it just, do they just present you with general purpose advice that you could just get from a fortune cookie? Or is it really just being very specific and asking the right questions, right? Similar to what we discussed with the interview processes. If someone gets your situation and can get to the core of a problem, then it most likely is a good fit or like a good person to work with, as opposed, again, to someone just throwing any advice in your direction.
It's funny, as we talk about this, I think about my friends that I often will bat around business ideas with, right? Like, because I've got some friends who want to start more traditional businesses, and we talk about it. And I realize I have about a 20% hit rate with them, right? Because I've never started that type of business before. And I can come up with interesting ideas and insights maybe they haven't thought of and lessons from my adventures or whatever my businesses. But for example, I've got a very low hit rate for good advice when it comes to, say, starting a bakery, or
Hmm.
because I've never done it. And for me, it's fun to think of those things. It's a new thought. It's a new challenge. It's a game, but I don't have the experience to say, okay, here's how you get suppliers. Here's how you get go to market. Here's how you control your costs. Here's best practice. Like I have none of that. And I think that that also comes into this expectation management. What you can get and what you can't. And I think that someone that's more trustworthy should also be aware of their own limitations.
Yes, and what you just mentioned, I would also add that they should ideally be from the same industry, because I've worked in multiple industries, but right now one of the industries I'm involved with is pharmacies, or health tech, if you want, in the broadest sense. And I'd have to say there's a surprising amount of detail in the reality that's easy to neglect, right? Because of course you can say on the outside it's a business. I know how business works, right? It has these functions. That's the purpose. This is how this and that works. But it's very much dependent on the context, which means the industry that you're operating in, because there may be legal requirements, other stakeholders, communities, etc. And I have to say that in that particular situation that I'm in, I underestimated the amount of complexity that I would find, right? I have mental models going in of how things can work. And then you see, oh, you didn't pay attention to this, that you weren't aware is a thing, actually, which means mostly documentation work, etc. Right? So, and I think that's easy to neglect and oversimplify. So I would definitely, if you're looking for someone to give you advice, I would look for someone who was also active or is active in your particular industry, um, to just make sure it's not oversimplified advice.
So where does this leave us, Alex? I mean, we've talked about who we shouldn't trust. should, should we not buy books anymore? Should we not go to courses anymore? What about the positive side? How do you approach these type of advice, books, structures, frameworks for understanding business now as someone more seasoned?
Um, I do it by speaking to friends, or like you and I talking, right? That's a good source. You could use AI, as we discussed, if you want to explore a new domain or just have like an initial conversation to just navigate the territory. I would also go with AI and with books. Do you know the Lindy effect?
No, tell me.
I'm sorry if I'm butchering this, but the general idea is the longer something has been around, the longer it will be around, right? The Bible is a good example. It's been around for so many years. So that's
Mhm.
an indicator for how much longer it will be around, which is a shortcut to saying, okay, probably, and this is something that I'm doing, probably you shouldn't read every new book that's coming out, right? There's still an infinite supply with books that tell you how to do business, right? How to like still teaching the essentials. Usually people slam in their own names for the same concept, so that makes it harder to compare, right? You read a book that says these are the three terms for X, and then another book uses other terms for the same thing. But it makes it much harder to compare them. So I try to stay away from new books and rather look into books that have been around for longer and try to find the essentials there. But I at some it's hard because for one is advice. If you lack knowledge or skills, again, I would go with AI. But then on the other hand, I think I read so many books and I asked myself, okay, when is it enough? When do you think you know enough to just stop reading the books and then try to come up with your own ideas and mindset of how to do certain things. So I try to read less books. I used to read a lot of them, also the new ones, because they had been advertised by, of course, the same gurus and influencers out there. And usually they were just a lot of words for a few core ideas that weren't so novel, I'd say. So probably read less books and speak more to friends or people who are entrepreneurs, right? There are communities, Slack groups, etc. I think there's more value in speaking with them than just consuming the next best book.
To be honest, it's funny when you say that. You could take the exact same sentiment that you said and take the opposite, sort of more positive takeaway from it, which is that these books, a lot of them will give very similar generic advice, and that's not bad.
Mhm.
If you're feeling like something is lacking in your thought or in your way of thinking about things, having some sort of framework to to think through entrepreneurial things is not bad. And if new people or old books or new books or whatever are coming out with different frameworks for similar ideas that help you to structure your entrepreneurial thoughts, that's actually a very good starting point.
Mhm.
And I find that too. I think it's all about expectation management. These books that are written for general audiences won't solve everything, but they give you a foundation. It's sort of like when I did my MBA as well. Most people that have that go through an MBA will find that it gives a very solid foundation and a solid amount of time to think through business problems. It's more geared for people that are moving into management and are managing companies than maybe entrepreneurs for the most part. But that you might learn something about entrepreneurship. It's not going to do it for you, though. It's like
Mhm.
pure book knowledge and pure academia will not be enough to actually go through it. And the reason is that entrepreneurship is a bit like a sport. You can't go out and play football by reading the football book and knowing all the plays without actually going on the field, because some of it has to be practiced and learned. But it's not bad to read the books, and it's not bad to read about the plays, and it's not bad to read about different structures that you can do to train yourself.
I would on that note, I would say if you want to learn something new, just try it out first. Try to be like get as close and fast to the things as possible. Like there are two ways you can do it, right? First, you say you want to learn about it first. You read the book, like running a marathon. You read the book and then you try it. But I'd say usually you're better off just trying it. Like this you don't need permission to try something, whether that even in business, right? Just try sales approaches, marketing, etc. Just try it and get some real feedback, and then just ideally mix this, right? Then read a book on the topic and see, okay, what you're missing. But I'd say if anything, then do this order and not start reading first, because you never finish, right? If you come with that mindset, you feel like, okay, there's more to learn before I even get started. So I'd always say act first and then read later to see, okay, what you're missing or how can you improve, and then ideally iterate over the cycle to make sure you start acting and not waiting for permission to start.
It all comes down to the nuance, right?
Always
I
does.
used always does. I used to like a phrase that I still use it a lot, and I you can imagine going down a road and that there's a ditch on either side of the road that you could fall into. There are dangers on either side. And the question is, which side of the road are you closest to the ditch for? If you're closest to one side, then you should take action toward the other. If the bigger danger right now is that you're going to spend all your time reading books and not take any action, then you should take action. If your bigger danger is that you've taken action like 15, 20 times and still haven't learned your lesson, you've got 5 failed businesses behind you because you've been doing everything wrong, then maybe read a book.
That's it for this episode of The Founder Experience. If you enjoyed it, do us a favor, hit subscribe wherever you are listening, whether that's Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app. If you've got a second, leave a rating or a review. It really helps. And you can find more episodes and behind-the-scenes stuff on our website, founderexperience.fm. And if you've got feedback or business ideas that you want us to talk about, shoot us a message at hello@founderexperience.fm. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for hanging out. We'll catch you next time.